To millions of viewers, Eustace Conway appeared to be the living definition of freedom. He was the rugged mountain man who rejected modern comforts and chose a life shaped entirely by nature, riding horses through the forests of the Blue Ridge Mountains, building fires from scratch, and surviving with skills most people only read about in history books. He became one of the most recognizable faces on the television series Mountain Men. Audiences admired his confidence, independence, and deep connection to the wilderness. To many, he represented a disappearing version of America, a man determined to preserve old traditions before they vanished forever. Yet behind the legendary image stood a far more complicated individual. People who spent time with him often described a man whose standards were relentless and whose way of life demanded sacrifice beyond what most could endure. While viewers saw adventure and freedom, those close to him experienced exhausting labor, strict discipline, and emotional distance. The contrast between the public myth and private reality created growing tension around his reputation. Some admired him as a visionary, while others questioned whether the image presented on television concealed a darker truth. As the years passed, stories about hardship, controversy, lawsuits, and personal struggles slowly emerged, forcing many to reconsider the man they thought they knew. A childhood that shaped an unusual path. Long before fame arrived, Eustace Conway was already different from the people around him. Born in South Carolina in 1961, he grew up fascinated by the outdoors and deeply uncomfortable with the direction modern society seemed to be taking. While other children dreamed about careers, television, or suburban success, Eustace became obsessed with wilderness survival and self-reliance. He studied animal behavior, primitive tools, and the traditions of Native American cultures with intense focus. Even at a young age, he believed modern people had become disconnected from the natural world and were losing essential skills that once defined human existence. By the time he was a teenager, his ideas had already begun shaping his entire future. At 17, he left home and chose to live in the woods, determined to survive with minimal dependence on modern conveniences. It was not simply an experiment or youthful rebellion. To Eustace, it was a mission. He wanted to prove that human beings could still live closely with nature without being controlled by technology or consumer culture. His early years in the wilderness were filled with hardship, hunger, physical exhaustion, and loneliness, but he viewed every struggle as proof that he was becoming stronger and more capable. Those experiences built the foundation for the public figure the world would later recognize as the mountain man of Turtle Island, building a life far away from modern society. As Eustace Conway grew older, his dream became more ambitious. He no longer wanted to simply survive in the wilderness alone. Instead, he envisioned creating a place where people could reconnect with nature and rediscover forgotten survival skills. That dream eventually became Turtle Island Preserve, a vast piece of land nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. When Eustace first walked across the property, he believed he had found the exact place he had imagined for years. To him, it was sacred ground that needed protection from the spread of highways, development, and modern distractions. Over time, he expanded the preserve and transformed it into a living classroom. Students and visitors arrived from all over the country, hoping to learn traditional skills such as fire making, shelter building, blacksmithing, farming, and animal tracking. Eustace wanted people to understand how deeply connected humans once were to the environment around them. He believed modern life had numbed society, making people dependent on systems they barely understood. Turtle Island became his answer to that problem. Life there was intentionally difficult. There were no luxury accommodations or easy shortcuts. Days began early and involved constant labor. Visitors chopped wood, carried water, tended animals, and learned survival through physical experience rather than theory. For some, the experience was life-changing. For others, it was overwhelming and far harsher than they expected. Fame arrives through Mountain Men. Everything changed when Mountain Men premiered in 2012. The show followed individuals who lived in remote wilderness areas across America, surviving through hunting, trapping, logging, and traditional skills. Among all the personalities featured, Eustace Conway quickly stood out. His appearance, philosophy, and unusual lifestyle fascinated viewers. He spoke passionately about living in harmony with nature and preserving ancient knowledge. Television audiences saw him as wise, fearless, and deeply authentic. The success of the show transformed Eustace into a national celebrity. Suddenly, people who had never considered primitive living were captivated by his world. Fans visited Turtle Island hoping to meet him and experience a glimpse of the lifestyle they had watched on television. Many described him as a modern-day Daniel Boone, a symbol of independence in an increasingly technological society. However, fame created contradictions Eustace could not fully escape. He openly admitted that television conflicted with many of his beliefs. He disliked how entertainment simplified reality and turned complex lives into dramatic stories. Yet the show also provided attention and financial support that helped Turtle Island survive. Cameras became part of daily life, and maintaining the preserve required balancing authenticity with public expectations. As more viewers admired the legend on screen, the pressure to maintain that image intensified, even while real-life problems quietly began growing behind the scenes. The harsh reality behind the romantic image. Many people arrived at Turtle Island expecting an inspiring wilderness retreat filled with adventure and freedom. What they encountered instead was often physically and emotionally exhausting. Eustace Conway believed survival skills could only be learned through discipline and hard work. Visitors were expected to fully participate in demanding daily labor, regardless of weather or comfort. Tasks included hauling manure, chopping endless stacks of wood, repairing structures, tending animals, and living without many conveniences modern people take for granted. Some students embraced the challenge and described the experience as transformative. Others left disappointed and frustrated. They had imagined spending time beside a legendary mountain man, but instead found themselves struggling through difficult routines under strict supervision. Former visitors occasionally described Eustace as critical, uncompromising, and emotionally distant. Relationships, both romantic and professional, often collapsed under the weight of his demanding lifestyle. Women who entered his life frequently discovered that loving a man devoted entirely to wilderness living required sacrifices they had never anticipated. Isolation, scarcity, and relentless physical labor slowly destroyed the romantic fantasy many initially carried. Eustace's commitment to his ideals left little room for compromise, and maintaining close personal relationships became increasingly difficult. The same intensity that made him admirable to some also pushed many people away. Behind the inspiring television image stood a man whose dedication to his philosophy often came at the cost of emotional connection and personal stability. The philosophy that guided his entire life. Despite criticism and controversy, Eustace Conway always remained deeply committed to the philosophy that shaped his life. He believed modern society had become dangerously disconnected from nature and from the practical realities of survival. To him, comfort and convenience were weakening humanity. People no longer understood where their food came from, how clothing was made, or how dependent they had become on systems they could not control. His mission was not simply about primitive living. It was about restoring awareness. At Turtle Island, Eustace tried to teach people how interconnected life truly is. He spoke passionately about ecosystems, food chains, environmental responsibility, and the importance of simplicity. His lessons often focused on the most basic human needs: food, water, shelter, and clothing. He believed mastering these essentials helped people understand themselves and the world more clearly. He also admired aspects of Native American traditions, particularly the respect shown toward nature and balance within the environment. Many of his teachings encouraged students to slow down, observe the natural world carefully, and appreciate things modern life often ignores. Watching insects, listening to birds, or standing quietly in the rain became meaningful exercises rather than distractions. For Eustace, reconnecting with nature was not about escaping civilization completely. It was about recovering a deeper understanding of life before technology drowned out human awareness. Trouble begins to surround Turtle Island. As Turtle Island grew more famous, scrutiny from local authorities increased. What had once been a relatively isolated preserve suddenly attracted public attention, visitors, and legal concerns. In 2012, county officials received anonymous complaints regarding construction and safety violations on the property. Inspectors soon arrived and discovered numerous buildings that had allegedly been built without permits or proper inspections. Cabins, barns, kitchens, and other structures spread across the preserve became the center of a major dispute. For Eustace Conway, the conflict represented far more than paperwork or regulations. He believed modern building codes were incompatible with the traditional methods he wanted to preserve. Many of the structures had been built using hand-cut lumber, stacked stone foundations, and unconventional techniques inspired by pioneer craftsmanship. To county officials, these buildings presented potential safety hazards. To Eustace, they represented freedom from industrialized systems. Authorities eventually gave him several options: bring the structures up to modern code, prove they were safe through professional evaluations, or tear them down entirely. The dispute quickly escalated into a public controversy. Supporters accused the government of attacking alternative lifestyles and destroying an educational preserve dedicated to sustainability. Critics argued that safety standards existed for a reason and could not simply be ignored. The battle became symbolic of a much larger cultural divide between traditional independence and modern regulation, placing Eustace directly at the center of a growing storm. The lawsuit that changed everything. Years before the building code battle intensified, Turtle Island had already experienced a tragedy that deeply affected its reputation. In 2005, a visitor named Kimberly Baker attended a retreat at the preserve through a teaching program. During a demonstration involving a sling, a stone accidentally flew backward and struck her in the eye, causing permanent blindness in one eye. What began as a routine activity instantly became a devastating accident with life-altering consequences. The incident led to lawsuits and years of legal conflict. Baker eventually settled with members of Conway's staff, while Eustace himself later agreed to pay compensation as part of a settlement agreement. However, delays and disputes continued, leading to additional legal action before the matter was finally resolved. The accident exposed a serious vulnerability in the image surrounding Turtle Island. Supporters viewed the preserve as a place of learning and personal growth, but critics argued that the lack of formal safety oversight created unnecessary risks. The incident forced people to question whether the pursuit of primitive authenticity sometimes ignored practical responsibility. For Eustace, the lawsuit became one more example of the clash between his philosophy and the legal realities of modern society. At the same time, television fame was beginning to grow. As audiences watched the fearless mountain man on screen, real-life legal and financial pressures were quietly threatening the stability of everything he had built. The contradiction between television and reality. One of the most revealing aspects of Eustace Conway's story was his own admission that public image and reality were not always identical. In interviews, he openly described himself as a showman. He understood that audiences expected a certain image from him, the wild mountain man living completely untouched by modern life. Yet maintaining Turtle Island required compromises that television viewers rarely saw. Although Eustace promoted traditional living, the preserve still depended on aspects of modern society. Visitors paid for educational programs, vehicles required fuel. Some supplies were purchased from stores. Tools like chainsaws were used because they made practical sense. Eustace himself acknowledged these realities without shame. He believed survival was about balance rather than strict purity. Television, however, often simplified that complexity. Viewers wanted inspiring stories about rugged independence and wilderness adventure. The camera naturally emphasized dramatic moments while leaving out many ordinary realities. Eustace later admitted that life at Turtle Island was not always as exciting as producers preferred for television audiences. This contradiction created growing tension around his public identity. Some critics accused him of hypocrisy, while supporters argued that adapting to modern realities did not invalidate his philosophy. Eustace never claimed perfection. Instead, he tried to demonstrate that people could move closer to self-reliance without abandoning civilization entirely. Yet the gap between the television legend and everyday reality remained difficult for many viewers to fully understand. The loss of Preston Roberts. Among the people closest to Eustace Conway was Preston Roberts, his longtime friend and frequent companion on Mountain Men. Preston shared Eustace's love for traditional craftsmanship, wilderness skills, and simple living. Their friendship became one of the emotional foundations of the series, showing viewers moments of humor, loyalty, and shared purpose amid the hardships of mountain life. In 2017, tragedy struck when Preston Roberts died following complications related to cancer surgery. His death deeply affected both Eustace and the fans who had followed their friendship on television. For Eustace, losing Preston meant far more than losing a television co-star. He lost someone who understood his world, his philosophy, and the difficult balance between public attention and private reality. After Preston's death, many viewers noticed a quieter and more reflective side of Eustace. The burden of maintaining Turtle Island, navigating public controversy, and preserving his life's mission seemed heavier than ever. Grief added another layer to the emotional weight he already carried. While the television series continued, the absence of his closest companion changed the atmosphere surrounding his story. Preston's passing reminded audiences that beneath the rugged image of survival and independence were real people carrying personal pain, loneliness, and emotional scars that cameras could never fully capture. Living between two worlds. As the years passed, Eustace Conway increasingly found himself trapped between two opposing worlds. On one side stood the wilderness philosophy that had defined his entire life. On the other stood the unavoidable realities of fame, regulation, financial pressure, and modern society. Maintaining Turtle Island required constant compromise, even as he continued preaching the importance of simplicity and natural living. He often explained that complete self-sufficiency was nearly impossible in the modern world. Even Turtle Island depended on outside resources in certain ways. Rather than rejecting all technology, Eustace gradually shifted toward promoting balance. He encouraged people to become more aware of where resources came from and how their choices affected the environment. Instead of demanding total rejection of modern life, he focused on helping people reconnect with practical skills and personal responsibility. Still, the pressure of public expectations never fully disappeared. Fans wanted him to remain the untamed mountain man they saw on television. Critics watched closely for contradictions. Meanwhile, the responsibilities of managing land, staff, students, and legal challenges continued growing heavier. The tension between authenticity and survival became one of the defining struggles of his later years. Eustace wanted to preserve an ancient way of thinking within a modern world that often seemed determined to erase it. Balancing those opposing forces demanded enormous emotional and physical energy. The lessons he wanted people to remember. Despite every controversy and hardship, Eustace Conway consistently returned to one central message. Modern people need to reconnect with reality. He believed many individuals had become dangerously disconnected from the basic systems supporting their lives. Few people understood how food was grown, how clothing was repaired, or how dependent society had become on technology and convenience. Rather than forcing people to abandon civilization completely, Eustace encouraged small but meaningful changes. He advised beginners to start simply, plant a few vegetables, learn to sew, build something with your hands, spend time outdoors without constant distractions. To him, these small actions could slowly rebuild awareness and confidence. One of his most repeated ideas was the importance of slowing down. Modern life moved too quickly, leaving little room for reflection or connection with the natural world. At Turtle Island, students learned patience through physical work and observation. Whether watching wildlife, tending gardens, or gathering firewood, the process itself became part of the lesson. Eustace understood that most people would never fully embrace the lifestyle he chose. Yet he hoped they might take at least one step closer toward understanding how life functions beneath the surface of modern convenience. For him, that small step mattered more than perfection. The legacy of a complicated mountain man today, Eustace Conway remains one of the most fascinating and divisive figures associated with wilderness living and survival culture. To some, he is an inspiring educator who dedicated his life to preserving forgotten skills and teaching environmental responsibility. To others, he represents contradiction, stubbornness, and the dangers of turning personal philosophy into public mythology. What cannot be denied is the impact he had on countless viewers and visitors. Through Turtle Island and Mountain Men, he introduced millions of people to ideas about self-reliance, sustainability, and humanity's relationship with nature. He challenged audiences to question whether modern comfort had come at the expense of deeper awareness and personal resilience. At the same time, his story also revealed the emotional and practical costs of living outside society's expectations. Lawsuits, controversies, strained relationships, public criticism, and personal loss all became part of the life hidden behind the mountain man image. The wilderness did not protect him from struggle. In many ways, it intensified it. Perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. Eustace Conway was never simply a television character or survival expert. He was a man constantly wrestling with impossible questions about freedom, authenticity, and how human beings should live. Whether admired or criticized, his life remains a powerful reminder that reality is always more complicated than legend.